Before I take you into the moment when I finally broke my silence with Jeremy and Julie, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever felt dismissed by your own family, ignored when you needed them most, or treated like your worth came down to what you could give instead of who you are not alone. It is never too late to protect your dignity and stand firm in what you know is right. But I also know that standing firm often carries a heavy price. The quiet nights of second-guessing yourself, the worry that you'll be pushed aside, the overthinking that can steal your peace. That is why I am so proud to share a guide we've created just for you. 7 ways to stop overthinking after 60. Simple, practical tips to feel peaceful every day. Inside, you'll find straightforward steps to quiet the noise of family drama, let go of guilt, and finally claim that calm, steady peace you deserve every single day. If you're ready to reclaim that peace, click the first link in the description or the pinned comment to learn more. And if this speaks to you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories of women who chose dignity over disrespect. Because what happened when I refused to hand Jeremy and Julie the money Robert left me is something you won't want to miss. My husband of 42 years had just passed. As I stood at his funeral, my heart broken, I kept waiting for my son Jeremy and his wife Julie to walk through those doors. They never did. I can still see the church that day. The flowers, the hymns, the quiet sobbing of old friends who came to say goodbye. I sat in the front pew, staring at the casket, wishing the past year had gone differently, wishing my husband, Robert, had more time. But what cut me almost as deep as losing him was looking back, again and again, toward the back of that church. Every time the door creaked, my heart jumped. I thought, maybe this time, it's them. Maybe Jeremy, my only child, had finally decided to come honor his father. Maybe Julie would be at his side. But each time, it was someone else. A neighbor, an old coworker, a cousin I hadn't seen in years. Everyone came, it seemed, except my own son and his wife. I tried to focus on the words being spoken, on the prayers, on the memories of the man I loved since I was a young woman. But there was an emptiness at that funeral that no sermon or hymn could cover up. The absence of my son. Robert deserved better. He was a man who worked hard every day of his life, who never once put himself before his family. And yet, the very child he worked so hard to raise couldn't be bothered to show up. I told myself, maybe something happened. Maybe they were stuck. Maybe something went wrong. But the truth came out soon enough. Not 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Jeremy's number. My heart leapt. Finally, he was calling. Finally, he would say he was sorry for missing his father's funeral. But that wasn't what happened. After a few short words, I heard Julie's voice. Clear, confident, almost businesslike. She didn't call to comfort me. She didn't call to check how I was holding up. She called for one reason. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk about the life insurance. The $870,000. We've got an incredible opportunity, and we know Robert would have wanted to invest in our future. We need that money for our startup business." I couldn't believe my ears. Here I was still setting the table for one, still waking up to an empty bed, still walking past Robert's favorite chair and breaking down in tears, and my daughter-in-law was already circling like a hawk over money that wasn't hers. She didn't even stumble over the words. There was no hesitation, no kindness, no grief, just a demand dressed up like an opportunity. And Jeremy? He stayed quiet at first, like a boy hiding behind his mother's skirt. When he finally spoke, all he said was, "Mom, it's the best thing we could do. Dad would have wanted this." That's when the reality hit me. They hadn't skipped the funeral because of some accident. They hadn't missed it because of some emergency. They skipped it because they didn't care enough, because they were already looking ahead, past their father, past his memory, past the pain I was drowning in, and straight to that life insurance check. My husband of 42 years was gone. my son and his wife didn't honor him, didn't stand with me when I laid him to rest. And now, they wanted to take the one thing Robert had left behind to protect me. It wasn't just shocking. It was like losing him all over again. But what Jeremy and Julie didn't know is that I wasn't as weak as they thought. They believed I would bend. They believed I would hand over my husband's legacy like it was nothing more than a check with their names on it. What they didn't expect was that I had already made up my mind. That $870,000 was going to do exactly what Robert wanted it to do, protect me, and carry his name forward with dignity. And by the time I was done, Jeremy and Julie would regret not only missing their father's funeral, but also daring to think they could use his death to line their pockets. This is my story. My name is Donna Reynolds, and I'm 68 years old. I've lived in the same town in Indiana most of my life. It's not a big place, but it's the kind where people know your name at the grocery store and wave when you drive by. I've always lived a simple life, and I never minded that. I married my high school sweetheart, Robert Reynolds, and for more than 40 years, he was my anchor. Robert wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type to brag or make a fuss, but everyone who knew him respected him. He worked at the same manufacturing plant for decades, waking up before sunrise, never once complaining about the long shifts. Even after he retired, people in town would stop him on the street to shake his hand. He was that kind of man, steady, dependable, and the kind who kept his word. We built our life around the values we believed in: family, honesty, hard work, and respect. We weren't perfect, but we tried our best. We raised one son, Jeremy. He was bright and had plenty of charm, but from the time he was little, I could see he had a streak in him that worried me. He always wanted more, and he wanted it the easy way. Robert noticed it too, but he was patient. He'd say, "He just needs guidance, Donna. We'll show him the right path." But Jeremy pushed against that guidance. I remember one moment as clear as day because it told me a lot about where my son's heart was. When Jeremy turned 17, he had his eyes set on a fancy sports car. He talked about it for months, dropping hints, saying things like, "Dad, imagine me pulling up to school in that." Everyone would notice. I could see Robert's jaw tighten whenever Jeremy brought it up. Finally, the week of Jeremy's birthday, Robert sat him down at the kitchen table. He said, calm and steady, "Son, you earn the things you want in this life. I'll help you find a job. I'll even drive you back and forth until you can get yourself there. But I'm not going to hand you something you haven't worked for." Jeremy's face went red with anger. He felt embarrassed. I think that his friends might be getting nicer cars while he was told to settle for less. For weeks, he barely spoke to Robert. He sulked, gave short answers, and stayed out late just to avoid the house. Eventually, he did get a job bagging groceries, and after a while, he bought himself an old used pickup truck. It wasn't pretty, the paint was chipped, and it rattled if you went over 50, but it got him where he needed to go. Still, I could tell the resentment stayed with him. He never forgave Robert for not giving him that shiny car. Looking back now, that moment sits heavy in my chest. Robert was trying to teach him a lesson that mattered. He wanted Jeremy to know that real pride comes from effort, not handouts. But Jeremy never saw it that way. He saw it as being denied what he thought he deserved. And that feeling, I believe, stayed with him into adulthood. By the time Jeremy met Julie, I had already started to worry about the direction his life was taking. Julie was bright and outgoing, but she was restless. She always had a new scheme, a new project, a new plan to make it big. At first, I thought it was just youthful energy, the kind that might settle down with age. But instead of grounding Jeremy, she seemed to encourage the part of him that always wanted more without doing the hard work. She would talk about business ideas, about investments, about turning small things into big money. I wanted to admire her ambition, but most of the time, it felt more like chasing shadows. Nothing ever stuck. The two of them together created a kind of whirlwind. They believed they were destined for something bigger, something better, but they didn't seem to realize that big things usually come from small, steady steps. Robert would sometimes shake his head after they visited, telling me quietly they want the world, Donna, but they don't want to break a sweat for it. It was hard for him. He loved Jeremy deeply, but he struggled to watch the man our son was becoming. Robert tried, in his way, to keep steering him back toward the values we raised him with. He offered advice. He told Jeremy to be patient, to work hard, to respect what he had instead of chasing what he didn't. But Jeremy never truly accepted those lessons. He wanted the shortcut, and Julie, with all her big talk and big plans, only reinforced that belief. I think that's why Robert set up his life insurance the way he did. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, I would be safe. He wanted me to have security after all the years we spent together. He knew Jeremy and Julie well enough to know that putting money directly in their hands would be dangerous. Now, standing where I am, I can see how the pieces fit. The boy who sulked because he didn't get a shiny car grew into a man who could skip his father's funeral and still demand a payout. And the young woman who once seemed full of ideas grew into someone who could look me in the eye, fresh from burying my husband, and call me about money. Robert did everything he could to pass on his values, but some lessons aren't accepted, no matter how much love is behind them. And that made what happened after his funeral all the more painful. After more than 4 decades of marriage, I thought Robert and I would have more years together. He had always been strong, steady, the kind of man who hardly ever took a sick day. But life has a way of reminding you that none of us are promised time. It started with shortness of breath. At first, Robert brushed it off, saying he was just tired. Then came the chest pains. I begged him to see a doctor. And when he finally did, the news was worse than we imagined. Heart failure. The doctor explained his heart wasn't pumping the way it should, and that while there were treatments, it was a long road ahead. From that day forward, my life changed. I became his caregiver. I managed his medicine. I watched his diet. I kept track of appointments. I learned how to read the signs in his face and body when he needed to sit, when he needed rest, when the pain was coming on stronger. It was exhausting, but I didn't think twice. This was the man who carried me through life's storms, and now it was my turn to carry him. The hardest part wasn't the work itself. It was the silence from Jeremy and Julie. They knew their father was sick. I told them. I gave them updates. But most of the time, I just got polite nods on the phone. They always had reasons why they couldn't visit. Work, travel, things going on. I tried not to take it to heart, but deep down, it hurt. Robert would sit by the window sometimes, hoping a car would pull up in the drive. It never did. I tried to soften it. I told him maybe they were busy, maybe they were waiting for the right time. But I saw the disappointment in his eyes. He never said it out loud, but I knew he wanted his son by his side. As the months went on, Robert grew weaker. He couldn't mow the lawn anymore, so our neighbor, Tom, started coming over to help. The ladies from church brought casseroles when they could. I leaned heavily on that small circle of people who showed up without asking. That kind of kindness is something you don't forget. The day Robert passed is etched in my memory. It was early morning, the house quiet. I had gotten up to fix him some tea. When I came back into the bedroom, he was sitting up slightly, looking out the window. He turned his head toward me and smiled. His voice was soft, but clear. "Donna," he said, "you've been my whole world." Before I could answer, his eyes closed. Just like that, he was gone. Peaceful. No struggle, no fear. It was as if he had waited for me to walk into the room so he could say goodbye. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding his hand long after his grip loosened. I knew this moment would come, but knowing doesn't make it easier. My partner, my best friend, the man who had stood by me since I was a girl, was no longer there. The next days were a blur. I called Jeremy, and when he picked up, I could hear the surprise in his voice. He said he was sorry and that he'd see what he could do about making it to the funeral. Julie's voice came faintly in the background, asking something about flights. I wanted to believe they'd come, but part of me already knew better. With Robert gone, I leaned on the people around me. The church stepped in, helping me plan the service. The pastor spent hours with me, going over hymns and scriptures. Neighbors stopped by with envelopes of cash to help cover flowers or food. Every gesture reminded me that while I had lost Robert, I wasn't completely alone. I picked out his suit myself, the navy one he always wore to weddings and graduations. The funeral home staff were kind, treating him with the respect he deserved. When I walked into the chapel on the morning of the service, I felt both broken and proud. Broken that he was gone, proud that so many had come to honor him. Friends from every part of his life were there. Old co-workers, church members, even people from the plant who hadn't seen him in years. They shared stories about his steady presence, about how he never raised his voice, about how he was the one they trusted to get the job done. But through it all, I kept glancing toward the doors, waiting, hoping. Jeremy and Julie never came. Every time the hinges creaked, I thought maybe it was them, but it never was. And as I stood to deliver my words about Robert, I had to push down the lump in my throat. I told myself to focus on the man we were honoring, not the people who didn't care enough to show up. After the burial, I went home to a house that felt too quiet. I sat in Robert's chair and let the silence settle around me. The phone didn't ring. No knock came at the door. Only later, weeks later, did Jeremy and Julie reach out. And when they did, it wasn't with sympathy. It was with a demand. And that's when the real heartbreak began. No wife should have to sit by her husband's bed alone in his last moments. Please share this story so more people understand what real love and commitment looks like. The morning of Robert's funeral, I sat at the vanity brushing my hair with trembling hands. The house was quiet, far too quiet, and each sound, the clock ticking, the faucet dripping, seemed to echo through the rooms. I slipped into my black dress, the same one I had worn to friends' funerals over the years, never imagining I'd be wearing it for my husband so soon. At the church, people were already gathering. Cars filled the lot, and men in dark suits shook hands at the entrance. Women hugged me as I stepped inside, some with tears in their eyes. The smell of lilies hung heavy in the air. As I walked down the aisle to the front pew, I could feel eyes on me. Some nodded in sympathy. Others gave small smiles meant to comfort. I took my seat and tried to steady my breathing. Behind me, voices murmured. "Where's Jeremy?" someone whispered. "Do you think he'll make it?" I stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear. I didn't have an answer. I wanted to say, "Of course he's coming. He's my son. He wouldn't miss this." But in my heart, doubt had already set in. The service began. The pastor spoke about Robert's life, his years at the plant, his dedication to family, his quiet strength. Friends stood to share memories. One man told how Robert had covered his shift when his wife went into labor. Another spoke of the time Robert fixed his truck after work without asking for a dime. I listened, proud but aching. Each story painted the picture of the man I had loved for more than 40 years. But with every creak of the doors at the back of the church, I turned my head, expecting to see Jeremy slip in. Each time, it was someone else, a neighbor, a cousin, an old friend. Never him. I could hear the whispers continuing. I thought for sure he'd be here. How could he not come? Poor Donna. The pity in their voices stung more than the grief itself. It wasn't just that Robert's own son wasn't there. It was that everyone else noticed too. His absence was loud, louder than any hymn sung that day. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my knees unsteady. I looked out at the crowd, at the sea of faces turned toward me, and I tried to focus on the man we were honoring. I talked about Robert's steady nature, how he never made promises he couldn't keep, how he taught me that love wasn't always about grand gestures, but about showing up every day. I wanted to talk about him as a father too, but the words caught in my throat. I could not bring myself to mention Jeremy, not when the empty seat behind me said enough. After the service, we moved to the graveside. The wind was sharp, cutting through the black coat I wore, and the sky was heavy with clouds. As they lowered the casket, I felt my chest tighten. I clutched the folded tissue in my hand, wishing Jeremy was there to place his hand on my shoulder, wishing he'd stand beside me as we said goodbye to his father. But he wasn't there. Instead, I leaned on neighbors, on cousins, on friends from church. They hugged me, whispered kind words, told me how much Robert meant to them. I appreciated it, but it wasn't the same. A woman needs her family in times like that. A wife shouldn't have to bury her husband alone when she has a son living just a few hours away. As the last handfuls of dirt fell onto the casket, I felt a hollow ache that no words could soothe. Robert was gone. My son was absent, and I was left to carry it all on my own shoulders. When the burial was over, people invited me back to the fellowship hall where tables of food waited. Casseroles, pies, coffee, the comfort foods of our community. I thanked them, but my energy was drained. I needed the quiet. I drove home alone, the car seat beside me empty. Pulling into the driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house Robert and I had built together. The porch light, the garden he once tended, the chair on the porch where he liked to sit on summer evenings. All of it looked the same, yet everything had changed. Inside, the silence was thick. I took off my coat, set it on the hook by the door, and walked into the living room. Robert's chair sat by the window, untouched. I lowered myself into it, letting the cushions swallow me, and stared out at the yard. I thought about how many evenings he'd sat there, sipping coffee, waiting for Jeremy to visit. And now he was gone, and Jeremy hadn't even come to say goodbye. That night, the house felt colder than ever. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and the old clock ticked on the wall. But otherwise, there was nothing, just me and the weight of what had happened. I had lost my husband, but in a way, I felt I had lost my son too. And though I didn't know it yet, the worst was still to come. Would you forgive your child if they missed their father's funeral? If your answer is no, like this video. If your answer is yes, explain in the comments, because I want to see how many people think there's any excuse good enough. 2 weeks after Robert's funeral, the phone rang. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. When I saw Jeremy's name flash on the screen, my heart leapt. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he finally realized what his absence had done. Maybe he wanted to talk about his father, to share memories, to grieve with me. I answered quickly, "Jeremy." There was a pause on the other end. "Hi, Mom." His voice was flat, almost distracted. Then I heard another voice in the background, sharper, more controlled. It was Julie. Before I could even ask how they were, she spoke up. "Donna, we've been meaning to call. We've been talking a lot about the future, and we think we know the best way to honor Robert." I sat there in silence, waiting for her to mention his kindness, his values, maybe even regret for missing the funeral. But that wasn't what came out of her mouth. Julie's tone was polished, almost like she had practiced. We know about the life insurance, the $870,000. That money could change everything for us. We have an opportunity, a real business idea. It's practical, it's smart, and honestly, it's what Robert would have wanted. He always believed in supporting Jeremy, in giving him a chance to succeed. I gripped the phone tighter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jeremy coughed lightly on the line. Yep, Mom. We've been looking at spaces downtown. It's for a cafe, but not just coffee, a place for people to work, connect, build things. It's kind of the future of business, We'd be creating something big, something lasting. His words trailed off, uncertain, almost like he didn't fully believe them himself. Julie jumped back in. It's forward-thinking. Donna, you wouldn't just be giving us money. You'd be investing in our lives. And Robert would be proud to know his legacy wasn't just sitting in a bank account, but building something. Her confidence rolled off her tongue as though she was pitching to strangers, not speaking to a grieving widow. I sat frozen. My husband had been gone only a matter of days, and instead of asking how I was sleeping or if I needed help around the house, my son's wife was asking me to hand over nearly $1 million. Jeremy added, his tone softer. It's the best thing we could do, Mom. Dad always wanted me to do something meaningful. This would finally prove I can. But his voice wavered, and I could hear the hesitation. It was clear to me who was pushing this. Julie carried on as though I had already agreed. We've already talked to some friends, and they think it's brilliant. All we need is the seed money to get started. It's a win-win. You help us, and Robert's name lives on in something that will outlast all of us. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Robert's name? She was dragging his memory into this scheme, as if he would have wanted his life insurance spent on a gamble. I thought of the nights Robert and I sat at the kitchen table, planning carefully, making sure I would be taken care of no matter what. He worked hard for decades so that, if the day ever came, I wouldn't have to worry about bills or groceries or keeping the lights on. That money was never meant to be seed money for a business my son's wife dreamed up. Julie, I finally said, my voice shaking, this money was for security. It was for me to live on, to make sure I'm all right. Your father made it clear. She didn't miss a beat. Donna, you're fine. You have the house. You have Social Security. You don't need all that money sitting there. Think about how much good it could do if you gave it to us. Isn't that a better use than just keeping it? Her words stung. Just keeping it. As though Robert's 40 years of hard work and sacrifice amounted to nothing more than numbers she could rearrange on a spreadsheet. Jeremy's voice chimed in again. Quiet. She's right, Mom. It's not like you'll spend it all. We could do something amazing with it. In that moment, my heart sank lower than it had even at the funeral. I realized my son hadn't called to comfort me. He hadn't called to share his grief. He had called to take. It wasn't only the request that hurt. It was the way Julie said it. Smooth, polished, almost cold. As if Robert's death was not a loss, but an opportunity. As if the life we had built together could be boiled down to a dollar amount to fund a coffee shop. I ended the call quickly, saying I needed time to think. When I set the phone down on the counter, my hands were trembling. For the second time in a month, I felt like I had lost Robert all over again. After that first call, I hoped the subject would die down. I thought maybe Jeremy and Julie would realize how wrong it was to bring up money so soon after Robert's passing. I expected at least a little space to breathe, to grieve. But that wasn't what happened. Julie started calling more often. Sometimes Jeremy's name would pop up on my phone, but when I answered, it was her voice I heard. She barely asked how I was doing. She jumped straight to the same topic, the insurance money. Donna, we've been running the numbers, she said one morning. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't you want to see us succeed? Don't you want Robert's legacy to be something bigger than a savings account? Her words cut into me. She spoke Robert's name as though she had the right to decide what his legacy should be. She knew as well as I did that Robert never cared for flashy ventures. He valued stability, hard work, and living within your means. But she twisted his memory to serve her own plan. Jeremy would get on the line sometimes, but his voice was different than hers. Hesitant, almost like he wasn't sure. He repeated her lines. Dad always wanted the best for us, or he would have wanted to invest in our future. But I could tell they weren't his own words. The truth became clear to me. Julie was the driver of this. She was the one pushing, the one making plans, the one turning Robert's death into a business pitch. Each call left me drained. At night, I'd sit in Robert's chair by the window, staring out at the quiet street, wondering how my life had turned into this. I had lost my husband, and instead of comfort, my son and his wife were treating me like a bank. As the days passed, Julie grew bolder. One afternoon, she called without Jeremy at all. Her voice was firm, like she was giving instructions. Donna, keeping all that money for yourself isn't right, she said. You're comfortable. You have the house. You have your retirement. You have Social Security. That money is just sitting there, doing nothing. We could turn it into something meaningful. You don't want to waste it, do you? Waste it. That's the word she used. As though Robert's 40 years of hard work, his countless overtime shifts, his missed holidays, were all wasted if the money wasn't handed to her. I bit my tongue, but inside my heart broke. This wasn't just about greed. It was about disrespect. Disrespect for me and for Robert's memory. Jeremy never defended me when she spoke that way. He stayed quiet, or worse, he echoed her. Julie's right, Mom. You don't really need it. Why not help us get started? We'll make you proud. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to ask, when did you stop thinking for yourself? When did you forget the lessons your father tried to teach you? But I held back. At night, when the phone was finally silent, I thought about Robert. I remembered the way he had tried to guide Jeremy as a boy. I thought back to that day at the kitchen table when Jeremy begged for a sports car, and Robert had told him, calm but firm, you earn the things you want in this life, son. Those words rang in my head louder than Julie's endless arguments. Robert had seen it then, the desire for shortcuts, the refusal to work for what he wanted. And now, years later, that same weakness was on full display. Only this time, Jeremy wasn't sulking alone. He had a wife by his side, a wife who turned shortcuts into speeches and guilt trips. The more they pushed, the more I felt the distance growing between us. I wasn't just losing a son to greed. I was losing him to her influence. One evening, after another exhausting call, I pulled out the folder Robert had kept with all our important papers. His handwriting covered the insurance forms, neat and careful. At the bottom of one page, he had written a note for me in his plain, straightforward way. This is for Donna, to keep her safe. I traced the letters with my finger and felt tears rise in my eyes. He had known this day might come. He had set things up, so I would never have to rely on anyone else, not even Jeremy. That night, I promised myself something. I wouldn't let Julie's smooth words or Jeremy's weak agreement undo Robert's intentions. This money wasn't theirs. It wasn't for cafes or co-working spaces or whatever big idea they were dreaming up this week. It was Robert's final gift to me, and I would protect it with everything I had. Still, the phone kept ringing. The pressure didn't let up. Each time I answered, Julie had a new angle, a new reason why it was the right choice. She spoke like it was inevitable, as though I would eventually cave in. But what she didn't realize was that every word only steeled my resolve. Because the more she pushed, the more certain I became. Robert had been right about Jeremy. He had always wanted the shortcut. And now, with Julie by his side, the shortcut had turned into a demand. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people called first, and by then I had learned to dread surprise visits. When I pulled back the curtain, my heart sank. There on the porch stood Jeremy and Julie. I opened the door slowly. "What are you two doing here?" Julie stepped forward with that same confident look she always wore, as though she had come to close a deal. Jeremy trailed behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. "We thought it would be better to talk face to face," Julie said. Her tone was polite, but it carried an edge, like she was prepared for a fight. I let them in because I didn't want the neighbors seeing us argue on the porch. But the moment they crossed the threshold, the air in my house changed. I could feel my stomach twist, the way it does when you know something unpleasant is coming. We sat in the living room, the three of us. Jeremy sank into Robert's old chair without a thought, and that alone made my chest tighten. Julie leaned forward, hands clasped, ready to speak. "Donna," she began, "we're running out of time. The space downtown won't stay available forever. We need you to release the life insurance money now. It's the only way this will work." I stared at her, still shocked at the boldness. "Julie, this isn't your money. This was Robert's plan to take care of me." Jeremy finally spoke, his voice sharper this time. "Mom, stop acting like it's just for you. Dad would have invested in me if he were alive. You know he would have. He always wanted me to do something big." I looked straight at my son, the same boy I had raised, the same boy Robert once taught to ride a bike in our driveway, and I hardly recognized him. His words were not only untrue, they were cruel. "Jeremy," I said quietly, "your father invested in you every single day of his life. He gave you a home, an education, and every opportunity he could. He worked himself to the bone, so you'd never go without. And when he needed you most, when we buried him, you didn't even show up to honor him." The room went silent. My words hung heavy in the air. Jeremy's face flushed red, but he didn't answer. Julie jumped in quickly, trying to cover the gap. "Donna, you're letting grief cloud your judgment. This isn't about the past. It's about the future. Think of what this business could mean. For us, for the community. Don't you want Robert's name tied to something lasting?" I shook my head. Robert's name already lasts. It lives on in every person he helped, in every day he showed up to work, in the way he carried himself. He doesn't need a coffee shop with your name on it to be remembered. Julie's smile slipped, and her tone sharpened. "So that's it. You'd rather let the money sit there while we struggle. That's selfish, Donna. Selfish." The word stung, but it also lit something inside me. For weeks, I had listened to their calls, their guilt trips, their twisting of Robert's memory. I had stayed quiet, hoping they would see reason. But sitting in my living room, hearing my daughter-in-law call me selfish for protecting what my husband worked for, that was the last straw. I stood up, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. "You think I'm selfish? I gave up years of my life, caring for your father while you two were too busy to visit. I sat by his bed. I held his hand when he took his last breath. I buried him without my son standing beside me. Don't you dare come into this house and call me selfish." Jeremy shifted in his chair, his eyes darting to the floor. Julie crossed her arms, clearly not expecting me to fight back. "I have one answer for you both," I said firmly. "No, you will not touch that money. Not 1 cent. It was Robert's wish to provide for me, and I will honor that. If you want to build something, then do it the way your father taught you, with hard work, not handouts." Julie opened her mouth to argue again, but I raised my hand. "I'm done talking. You've said enough, and I've heard enough. Get out of my house." For the first time since they arrived, Jeremy looked me in the eye. His expression wasn't anger anymore. It was shame, though he tried to hide it. He stood slowly, avoiding Robert's chair as though he realized too late what it meant to sit there. Julie huffed, muttering under her breath, "You'll regret this." But I didn't flinch. I walked them to the door and opened it wide. The only thing I regret is that Robert isn't here to see what his son has become. Now go. They stepped out onto the porch, and I shut the door firmly behind them. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From release. From finally saying what needed to be said. I leaned against the door, tears rolling down my cheeks. I whispered to the empty room, "I did what you'd want, Robert." I stood my ground. For the first time since his passing, I felt a small sense of peace. I had protected his legacy, and in that moment, I knew I'd keep protecting it, no matter how hard they pushed. If you felt that line in your heart the way I did when I said it, then share this video. Don't just scroll on. Someone you know needs to hear it. And if that still doesn't convince you to subscribe, write in the comments why not. After Jeremy and Julie stormed out of my house, the silence that followed was heavy, but also strangely calm. For weeks, I had been pulled in every direction by their calls, their words, their pressure. Now, for the first time, I felt clear about what I had to do. I went to the drawer where Robert kept all our important papers. I pulled out the folder again, the same one I had looked through on those quiet nights after the phone calls. Inside were the insurance documents, his notes, and the letter from the company confirming the payout. The next morning, I called the insurance office and set up an appointment. I needed to hear it from someone official that the money was mine and that no one else had any claim to it. Sitting across the desk from the agent, I explained what had been happening. She listened patiently, then pulled out the policy. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, "this policy is in your name alone. You are the only beneficiary. No one else has any legal right to it." Her words brought a rush of relief. It felt like Robert was standing behind me, reminding me that he had thought this through. He knew me well enough to plan for the worst. He had made sure I would be safe, no matter what. Even so, I wasn't completely satisfied. I wanted extra assurance. So I went to see a lawyer in town, a man who had helped us with our wills years back. I told him everything: Robert's passing, the funeral, the calls, the visit, the accusations. He shook his head slowly. "You don't owe them a penny," he said firmly. "The money was Robert's gift to you. If you want to use it for yourself, that's your right. And if you want to use it for something else, that's your choice too. But they can't force your hand." I walked out of that office feeling lighter. The legal side was clear, and in my heart, I already knew my answer. The money would never go to Jeremy and Julie's so-called business. Not now, not ever. But I also knew Robert wouldn't want me to just sit on it and live small out of fear. That wasn't who he was. He was practical, yes, but he cared deeply about helping others. I started thinking about what he valued most. Robert loved this community. He had spent his life working at the plant, but he also volunteered at the local trade school when he could. He believed in giving young people a chance to learn a skill, to build a future with their own hands. I remembered how his eyes lit up when he talked about one of the students he mentored landing a job after graduation. That memory sparked something inside me. What if I used part of the insurance money to carry on that work? Not in Jeremy and Julie's way, chasing dreams without a plan, but in Robert's way, steady, honest, and meant to build people up. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I started writing down ideas. A scholarship fund for trade school students, a donation to the school to update their equipment, maybe even a small endowment in Robert's name, so his legacy would live on in the very place he cared about. The more I wrote, the more right it felt. This was what the money was meant for, not for lining pockets, but for lifting others in a way Robert would be proud of. I picked up the phone and called the director of the local trade school. I told him about Robert, about his years of mentoring, about how much he believed in giving young people a fair start. His voice softened as he remembered Robert. He was one of the best volunteers we ever had. He said, I asked what they needed most. He explained that many students struggled to afford tools and tuition. A scholarship could change their lives. Equipment upgrades could improve their training. Donna, he said, if you wanted to honor Robert, this would be the perfect way. When I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before Robert's illness. I knew I was on the right path. That night, I sat in Robert's chair and whispered to him, as I sometimes did when the loneliness was heavy, I know what I'm going to do, Robert. They won't use your hard work for selfish dreams. Instead, your name will open doors for young people who need a chance. That's how you'll be remembered. The decision was made. I would protect the money from Jeremy and Julie, but more importantly, I would turn it into something lasting, something they could never imagine because they had never understood what truly mattered to Robert. Once my decision was made, I moved quickly. I contacted the trade school director again and arranged a meeting. We sat down in his office with paperwork spread across the table, and I explained that I wanted to create a scholarship fund in Robert's name. This is important to me, I told him. Robert gave so much of his time here. I want young people who don't have the means to know that someone believes in them, just like Robert did. He nodded, his eyes soft. We'll make sure every student who benefits knows exactly who Robert Reynolds was. Hearing that filled me with pride. I knew Robert would have been pleased. He had always believed in practical education, in teaching people skills they could use to build real lives. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. We worked out the details together. The money would provide scholarships for students who couldn't afford tuition and tools. It would also fund upgrades to classrooms and equipment. Robert's name would be attached to it all, a reminder of the kind of man he was. When everything was finalized, I asked if I could make the announcement at church. That felt right. The congregation had been my support through the darkest days, and Robert had sat in those pews for decades. On Sunday morning, I walked to the front of the church after the service. My hands shook a little, but my voice was steady. I want to share something with you all. I began. Robert believed in hard work and in helping others. Many of you know how much time he spent at the trade school, encouraging young people to build their future with their own hands. To honor that, I've set up a scholarship fund in his name. Starting this year, students will receive help with tuition and tools so they can step into good jobs and solid futures. Robert's legacy will live on through them. The congregation broke into warm applause. A few people stood and hugged me afterward, saying how fitting it was. That's exactly who Robert was. One man told me, for the first time since his passing, I felt a sense of peace. Not just for myself, but because I knew Robert's values would continue in a tangible way. His name would stand for something real and lasting. Of course, word traveled fast. In a town like ours, news spreads quickly, especially when it's something positive. Within days, the story reached Jeremy and Julie. I didn't hear from them directly at first, but a cousin mentioned that Julie was furious. She had expected to be holding the keys to a new business by now, and instead she was hearing about a scholarship that guaranteed they'd never see a penny. Jeremy, I was told, looked humiliated. People in the family asked him why he hadn't supported the idea, why he hadn't come to his father's funeral, why he was letting Julie speak for him. He didn't have answers. I never set out to embarrass him. My goal was simply to protect Robert's legacy. But in the process, Jeremy and Julie's true colors showed. Everyone could see where their priorities had been. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the shift. Relatives who used to ask me if Jeremy and Julie were visiting stopped bringing it up. Church friends who once hoped they might come around started telling me I had done the right thing. Quietly, without making a scene, people chose sides. And it wasn't theirs. Jeremy grew more distant. He stopped calling altogether. Julie, who had been so bold on the phone before, went silent. I knew they were angry, but I didn't feel guilt anymore. I had given them my answer, and I had honored Robert in the best way I knew how. One afternoon, I drove past the trade school and saw the sign out front, Robert Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Applications, open. My heart swelled. His name was there for everyone to see, tied not to a failed business plan, but to something that would give young people a chance to succeed the right way. That night, as I sat in Robert's chair by the window, I whispered, "They'll never take what you worked for. Your name is safe. And now it'll mean something long after both of us are gone." In the end, Jeremy and Julie were left with nothing but the sting of their own choices. They had missed the chance to stand by Robert when it mattered. They had skipped his funeral, and then they tried to profit from his death. The money they wanted so badly was now forever out of reach. And while they sat in silence, isolated from the family, I sat surrounded by friends and neighbors who knew the truth. Robert's legacy wasn't a check to be cashed. It was a life of integrity, now carried forward in every student who would benefit from his scholarship. Losing Robert was the hardest thing I've ever faced. He was my husband, my partner, my best friend. For 42 years, we built a life together, and when he passed, a part of me went with him. But in many ways, I lost my son too. Jeremy's choices and his silence at his father's funeral showed me a side of him I had never wanted to see. And Julie's cold determination to get her hands on Robert's life insurance money only made it worse. They both made their priorities clear. Money came before respect, before family, before love. At first, that realization nearly broke me. But as time went on, I began to see things differently. I may have lost the closeness I once dreamed of having with my son, but I gained something else. I found strength in honoring Robert's values, not in giving in to guilt or pressure. Today, Robert's legacy lives on, not through a risky business plan, but through something steady, lasting, and true to who he was. His scholarship fund is already helping students. I've met a few of them, young men and women, who remind me of Robert when he was starting out. They are working hard, learning trades, building honest futures. When I see their faces, I feel proud. Jeremy and Julie wanted $870,000 for their business dream. But instead, Robert's name now sends young people into real careers, into real futures. That's the kind of legacy my husband deserves. I sit in his chair sometimes, looking out the window at the same yard he used to tend. It's quiet, but not empty. I feel him there with me, in the life we built, in the lessons he left behind, and in the young people who now have a chance because of him. I don't know if Jeremy will ever come around. Maybe one day he'll look back and see what he threw away. Maybe he won't. I can't control that. What I can do is hold on to the truth. Robert's life was built on hard work and respect, and that's how I'll carry his memory forward. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you forgive a child who didn't come to their father's funeral, but showed up when the money was on the table? Or is some respect too sacred to be bargained away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, if you believe in standing up for what's right even when it's hard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who might need to hear them. Lastly, the guide, 7 Ways to Stop Overthinking After 60. Simple practical tips to feel peaceful every day is waiting for you in the pinned comment. Thank you for listening.